Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our show. My name is Avril Hepner. I'm from BDA Scotland, and tonight's topic for discussion is how do you make your home and your home environment dementia friendly? So, as you can see, there it is at the bottom of the screen. It's part two. Now, some of you may have watched us in April. So we're back again because for two reasons really. One is that after our first episode in April, there was such a response from people saying we want more. So we agreed that we'd come back for that. And the second reason is because today is a special day because it's the World Alzheimer's Day. So the whole of the world is celebrating and promoting and remembering Alzheimer's. So we thought this was a perfect opportunity to have our part two and particularly talk about dementia friendly homes and how we can achieve that. So hopefully for any of you at home, if you know someone who has dementia, maybe we can help you. So before we start, I would like to introduce one of our first guests, and this is Emma. Hi, Emma. Lovely to be back, Avril. Thank you so much for asking me. Could you tell us just a wee bit about yourself, Emma? Absolutely. I'm a researcher and I'm based at the University of Manchester, and I've been working in the dementia field for over the last 10 years. And you'll see the flower that I'm wearing tonight. That flower is a forget-me-not, and that is the flower that's associated with Alzheimer's. So it's if you think of Marie Curie, they use the yellow daffodil to promote and showcase their agenda. Well, that's exactly the same for Alzheimer's. Oh, that's wonderful. So you're really encouraging people to wear the forget me not so that it raises awareness. Well, that's brilliant. So maybe our viewers at home, if you see these flowers on sale, you might buy one and wear one. And our second guest is Caroline Denmark. Hi, Caroline.
Hi. Thank you for having me. Thank you for asking me on. So it's nice to be back again. I was actually here with Emma for part one. So it's nice to be here again for part two. I'm really here speaking from a personal experience in terms of, my mum, my dad, and other family members who have been through dementia and the role that I took on as a carer. And I'm also here for my work that I do with the Alzheimer's Society, where I've done some training for them to do with dementia, where I go out and about and I talk to people about dementia on their behalf. And then in terms of my work with the British Deaf Association, the BDA as well, I did some work with care homes across Scotland and looking to make sure that they actually did some work specifically for those with dementia. So it's nice to be back.
Oh, I'm delighted you're both here. I think before we move on to tonight's topic, it may be worth maybe doing a wee summary of what we talked about in part one, maybe like the bedroom, the living room, things like that. That these places that you want to continue a person who has dementia to be as independent as possible, but these can be the areas that can cause a bit of concern. And so before we move on, I'm just wondering, because this will be new information tonight, that it might be useful to just go back and maybe Caroline, if you could go back and talk about the blanket. And I think before we do that, we'll have a wee look at a picture of the blanket first. Well, as you can see, that blanket is full of information. Can you tell us about this blanket? I know you love it.
Yeah, well, actually, I have to say, when I see the blanket, it brings back loads of memories for me, something that my mum really treasured. And I put that blanket together primarily because it was all of the memories my mum had with our family. And she was such a family woman that she really had those memories of all different members of the family. And of
Yeah.
course, what tends to happen is you don't remember where you've left your photos when you suddenly think, oh, I'd like to look at a certain photo. So I put them all in one place on a blanket. And she would always have that with her. And I kind of told a story. It was her childhood when she met my dad, her friends from school. And it kind of followed a bit of a life journey there. And mum had that with her all the time. So, just when she'd be sat on the sofa, she'd have that blanket across her lap. And what those photos would do is
Yeah.
A, they'd give her some comfort, but B, they would be topics for conversation as well. That's what was really nice about it. So I can say from personal experience, it's well worth doing. If you ever find yourself in that situation, do take it on.
So I suppose what you're saying, a blanket would be useful in a home anyway. And you know that if you then have a blanket that you create all of or put all the memories on it, then it really does it's really beneficial for the person who has dementia. So for our people, watching at home, it may be something that you want to do. It was Caroline's family that decided to do that, but maybe some people in the audience maybe wonder how you buy it. Could you tell us?
Yeah, no, just got it online. So basically, if you type into, the internet memory blanket, or, there are specific sites that tailor for this kind of thing. And you, of course, will have to provide all of the photos. You would have to tell them in what order those photos should be placed. But you tell them, they produce it, they send it to you. So it's great. But the simple thing is that at home, we obviously have our photos everywhere. But when you have a deaf person with dementia, it can be quite hard for them to look at their surroundings. Deaf
Yeah.
people with dementia tend to be quite inverted. So to have that blanket really works.
That's so good. Thank you so much for that explanation, Caroline. In part one, in April, that we were talking about the blanket, and our audience, are want to know if there's been any updates, if there's any new things that they can buy. Is there any resources out there? It's coming up for Christmas now. It might be an ideal opportunity to get something. So today, obviously, both of you know it's World Alzheimer's Day. Um, but can I ask you, Lemma, the theme is what is the theme around the world? Well, as you said, Avro, it's World Alzheimer's Day, and it's to make people think about dementia as a topic and how they can relate to people who have dementia, particularly within their family. The theme that they're talking about is how what makes you you. What's that je ne sais quoi? What's that uh, essence of you? And it's finding out about the person, who in your family is important to you, what pets or animals are important to you, what's your history, and when you find out about individual people, their backgrounds, just their childhood and everything can be so different. And for deaf people as well as hearing people of dementia, you have to think about that person's personal journey and not think about what generally happens. If you want to have a successful transition, then what you have to try and avoid do is not label someone, but look at the person.
I think that's really important. And I'm really pleased you've raised that, Emma. And what I'd like to do is come back to this topic of the home and how we might make adjustments in the home for people. So when we think about somebody with dementia, and we talk about the all about me, that concept, the all about me. And you see that quite a lot. I see a lot of sort of hearing people using that phrase. And I think a lot of deaf people don't really, attach themselves to that phrase. So what do we mean by the all about me sort of page? So can you talk us through that, either one of you? What do we mean by all about me? Yeah, well, I remember actually with my mum, she had a simple page that had a photo of her on the front, and it was titled "All About Me." And the idea of that page is it would outline exactly what was it that made my mum my mum. You know, what to do with her if she was upset, what she would like you to do with her if she was upset, who the important people in her life are, what her likes and dislikes were, and that was, you know, that was really important. And it's a bit like you see care plans that people have, whether in your own domestic home or whether in a care home. There's usually a care plan, and there's usually an all about me page. But personally, I think we should have a deaf version for this, because I think it really focuses on the individual person, not least with deaf people. As we know, there are cultural differences. What makes a deaf person who they are? And there should be a box for that. And we're looking to tailor that, and we'll be using that with BDA Scotland. And we kind of hopefully will benefit those family members and friends, but also carers who potentially don't know the individual they're coming in to help. And actually, as you said, Avril, the all about me is very similar to this theme for World Alzheimer's Day, which is great. So, yeah, the theme today, obviously, in the home, if you have an external carer coming into the home, it's really valuable, because what they can do is read that all about me first before they meet the person, which is great. And what we'll move on to now is adjustments that people might want to make to their home. Emma.
Yeah, it's so important to encourage the carers and the family of the person to adapt and to get information about their background, because you can't assume that everybody would know everything. So all of that list will enable others to adapt their behavior or be able to come up with a solution, rather than arriving and not having a clue what to do and just sitting there. This way, the family and the carers can be more interactive, and maybe you've brought up a conversation and you're not getting that rapport, but it could be that that topic of conversation is not that person's interested in.
And to add to that, I think it's also about making individuals feel valued. That's what's really important. If
Yeah.
somebody's taken that time to get to know them, it goes a long way.
Yep, and you're absolutely right, because if we keep putting these wee notes in it, then and updating it, then the carers and family will really like that. We've also got something else to show you, and it's a picture of a fidget. We'll talk about that in a minute. So there you can see it. It's a knitted wool pink octopus. Caroline, you wanted to show this, and you have a real one there that you can show our viewers at home.
I do. Let me show you an example. So this is a fidget.
Okay.
And the idea really is it's really important. And I've seen this being used elsewhere. And actually, it relates to a certain behavior with my mother, with my stepfather, and actually others that I've seen, other deaf people that I've seen with dementia, that when they're on their own, they start to, get a bit lost within themselves, and they start picking at themselves. And often you see a deaf person with dementia with sores, and that's primarily because they get a bit lost within their mind, and then physically they just start picking at themselves and causing themselves an injury. So the idea with a fidget is it allows them to play with something. It's comforting. That's the idea. It provides that degree of comfort. It's a bit like I said with the blanket before. It's comforting. And I think it speaks to this point of deaf people with dementia. What we need to do is make sure that they're physically engaged, mentally engaged, that they have that comfort, both physical and mental. So these fidget toys are great. I mean, they're everywhere, but they're really, really useful.
Emma, you'd something to add? Yes, it's also important to remember that the using fidgets for people who are at late stage dementia, where communication really is very limited, and that they're finding processing their environment really difficult. They're getting stressed or a bit upset or frustrated. That something to keep them calm and keep them at peace and distracted. So a fidget can work. It helps people focus in, rather than maybe feeling that they're getting a sensory overload with too much information. And that can help really calm someone down, maybe prior to a new activity or prior to the start of a new conversation. Because it really is easy for people with dementia to get confused. And it's also very easy for them to not understand what's happening in the conversation. And it could be someone's coming in and saying, I'm so happy I've got a new job. That would be too much information. And they could maybe get upset easily. So something like a fidget is something that you could use, make sure they're calm, and while you introduce slowly the conversation. Because we really do have to remember a person with dementia needs time to process information and to reconnect.
And actually, I'd like to jump on the back of what Emma just said there. I think that's so true what she said, just from my anecdotal experience, with my mum or my stepdad. It was a similar thing where they were sort of, picking at themselves. And that's primarily because they had moments of isolation, really. But of course, when they were at home with us as family, they were constantly engaged. But that isolation is what's so difficult as well.
I suppose what you're saying is that having a few fidgets lying around the house, maybe in different rooms or maybe next to the favourite seat or something, these are things that you can put in the house and make the home more friendly. In some ways, it's similar to a child's dummy. You'll see someone with 1,000 dummies placed everywhere just to help the child when they're in discomfort. But I'm thinking about our audience at home that are maybe, amazing knitters or crafters. They could make things like that. They don't have to buy it. You could actually make it yourself. I know one of our local deaf clubs has a crafts class. So it could be something that they make, um, and then they feel as if they're giving back to the community. What do you think?
I think it's a beautiful idea, really.
I mean, the two things I would add to that, Avril, is you can order them online. It's spelled Fidget, fidget. It's not a toy. I mean, it's for adults. But you'll see there is many, many online stores that sell them. But I loved Avril's idea of the deaf clubs maybe volunteering to make these things, so they could even make them more deaf friendly and maybe, sew a hand, so the hand's coming down, and they can feel the fingers and things like that. Maybe the hand's linked to the sign language, something like that. I mean, the picture that we saw earlier on was a pink octopus, but we could maybe change it to a hand, and then that's maybe feels more relevant, and a bit of pride about being deaf.
Yeah, so let's see if anybody watching is prepared to be our first official volunteer to make some of these fidgets. It would be great because we could hand them out at Christmas.
Perfect idea. Because they're absolutely wonderful because of the textures that people can feel. We've got another product to show you. You see this woolen thing? Okay. And it's called a muff. And when you go inside, you see it's got a knitted pom-pom inside. Now, the idea of this muff, and you can see in the outside as well, it's got other little things attached to it, different textures and feelings. Can one of you explain, Emma? Okay, do you remember when you were wee and you had these like furry ear muffs, and then there was a furry muff that you put your hands in? Well, that's where it's sort of coming from, because we used to put your hands in there, it gives you warmth, but it also gives you comfort. And you can see on that particular woolen muff, there is lots of different textures on that. Now, there's a very heart-shaped button, and what happens is they can feel around and just touch the material, and it would give them comfort. And also, they can put their hands inside, and you can feel things. Is that a bell there, Avro? I think so. I think so.
It's
So
probably for sound, isn't it? I think
I
probably.
think that's probably been made for someone who's hearing. So oh, it was a
And
deaf
we've got
person.
Yeah, and we've got that situation where deaf people could knit this, couldn't they? They could knit this, and they could add photos. They could add different sort of
Oh, what a
memorabilia
wonderful
on
idea.
here. Yeah, well, actually, when we were talking about the fidgets, you know, it could be a deaf person who loved dangly earrings. And then you could have a fidget that's kind of designed in the same way as their favorite dangly earrings. It comes back to that point of personalizing what we're doing for people.
Oh, perfect. I've got a question coming in, and it's from Erin McCluskey. So I'll read the question. Worry worms, I recognise those, happy face. I have also seen another crocheted and knitted wrist sleeve with buttons and some fidgety bits on it too. Just wondering if these are as good.
Yeah, worry worms. That's a cool name, actually.
So I think anything that has a touch that you're using your senses and it's tactile, and the word tactile means it has different feelings. It's not the same thing. Sometimes you might experience yourself that you'll touch something, you'll say, oh, that's too spiky for you, or that's too smooth. Everybody has their own preferences. So you're looking for textures that will stimulate the person, but also that the person enjoys touching. And that gives them something to think about. Maybe we'll give them a moment of quiet reflection, but I think it could be something like it would maybe remind you of maybe an old jumper you had when you were younger, or maybe if it's some tweed on it, that would maybe remind you of a jacket you once had. So it's always thinking about the things for that person. And also think about that person's life. They might have an old coat or an old skirt or something lying in a wardrobe. Cut a bit of that material out and sew it onto the muff. And that maybe will be something that'll stimulate, memories from the past.
I really like that. And again, like thinking about memories of my mum, she had lots of sort of soft toys. I think that's really useful because, for example, like a cuddly toy of a cat or a dog, primarily because my mum, she had cats and dogs when she was growing up. So, you can get toys that sort of replicate that. You can kind of get toys that replicate a short-haired pet or a long-haired pet, and you just get that
Oh,
visual and tactile memory. And I remember my mum, she would spend a lot of time stroking these toys, and it was really, really comforting for her.
it's interesting you bringing up animals, or stuffed animals, but there is a theory that it's really nice for animals to come and visit. People, and also I like the idea if someone maybe was used to a dog but couldn't have a dog anymore, that you can change it and maybe have a little toy dog that maybe it could be animated as well. You see these now? Do you think that would be helpful? You're absolutely right, Avro. There's so many toys around. You've got the ones that are completely still, you ones that are animated and it has a bit of movement. Some even look like they're breathing. And I know that some people with dementia find it really difficult to have any pets in their home, and they have many reasons for that. But I know that the comfort of a pet is there, and that can help other people. But unfortunately, with dementia, the difficulty is does a person think that dog or animal is real or not? And it has to. it's a real personal challenge for someone with dementia to actually understand reality and not reality. So it is great. I believe that actually having the contact with a real animal, a real dog that you signed or spoke to, doesn't matter, whatever it is, I think that's so important. However, but I do know that it can affect some people with dementia. There is some people who use dolls that maybe that reminds them of their own children or their grandchildren, and that then brings up these lovely memories. So it makes the person feel as if they're back in control of their life because they know how to handle a baby. But remember, this is a doll; it's not real. Um, and can make that person feel so much happier.
Yeah, I agree with that, and and that really does fit in with our theme about things we can do within the home, whether that's a stuffed toy, a cat, or a dog, or a doll, as you say. It's about building that sense of rapport in the home for the person with dementia. And actually, what I'm going to do now is move us on a little bit further, which is to talk about almost leading on from our part one of this session, where we spoke about eating at home, food at home. And last time we spoke about different coloured plates, but this time let's talk about a picture menu. Okay, so that's an example there of just having like a picture menu that you can have up at home or in a care home or in, your own home. And sometimes, a person with dementia, it can be quite frustrating being asked constantly what we're going to have to eat, what we're going to have for dinner. But having that up on the wall there and having what the menu, like menu, quotes unquote, what we're going to eat today, it just helps that deaf person with dementia to be able to see this is what we're going to have. Like, what do you both think? I agree with you, actually. And I really like seeing that picture because I know that when, for example, I remember being in a farm and when you get the sort of pictures that come out, we would cut things out and put them up on the wall. I think it really depends because, of course, if the person likes homemade food and they're planning their food Monday through Friday, well, then you can sort of plan quite easily, maybe your morning and your evening meals. But you might actually be in a different situation where you've got sort of meals on wheels situation where they're bringing the food in. But actually, what you can then do, rather than having a picture of the food you're going to receive, you can have what time dinner is going to come, that sort of thing, and that could then really help, because sometimes you can forget you've eaten.
Yeah.
And you really get that benefit, that visual benefit. Oh yeah, I ate at 6 o'clock. Yeah, and this is what I had. So it's really great.
Can I just add to what Caroline has said is that it is absolutely key having that visual presence there because you're absolutely right. A person with dementia maybe forgets to eat, and also they might not eat the same as they would eat before if they were on their own. So it tends to be that people with dementia will look at other people and copy what they're doing. And remember, thinking again that when you have dementia, all of the things that you were taught, all the rules about eating and dining out, everything you were taught over a lifetime have all gone. So that person, if you're with someone, you know, the person can watch the other person with them and copy what they're doing. So in their brain, they're thinking, "Oh, they're using a knife. I'll use a knife. They're eating that. I'll eat that." So that's something that maybe when a carer or someone in the family they go into the fridge and they're like, "Oh, there's still stuff in the fridge and they're losing weight." I would say, maybe come in, bring an apple, banana, something and sit there with the person while they're eating.
I mean, thank you, Emma, for sharing that, because I totally agree that there's often, thoughts of, oh, this person's losing a lot of weight. And what tends to happen is that carers can come in, they can put food on the table, and then they leave. And that deaf person with dementia forgets that the food is there on the table. So actually, what I think is really important is that that person needs to sit down and eat with someone. So I really agree with what you said there, Emma. Like, as you said, being able to just walk in and be eating an apple yourself. Would you like an apple too, for example? And that really helps to model that behavior of eating.
You've brought back memories for me from my father when he had dementia. I would come and I would watch him eating, and he didn't like me watching him. But if I went away, I just felt it was so lonely for him by himself. So what I had to do was, like, at the weekends, for example, I'd plan to work out how I was going to eat with my dad. So on a Saturday morning, I would have to make sure I had no breakfast until later on, and then I would say to my dad, "Do you want to get some breakfast?" If I not had anything, we'd go to a cafe and we'd sit down and we'd eat humongous amount of food because he would be copying. So in order for me to encourage him to eat, I had to eat the same amount. And I'd forgotten about that. So you've brought that back to me, that actually being with someone whilst they're eating not only helps with the loneliness, but helps with the understanding as well. The other thing we could think about is that a fridge door is blank. Why not put pictures on the outside of the fridge and what's in it, so that people, can so they would know what's in the fridge. It would be great if you could have one of those see-through fridges. However, but that's an alternative. You know, all when a person with dementia goes in to a kitchen, everything all seems the same. So thinking about it, you want to really make everything look unique rather than looking streamlined in what a normal kitchen looks like.
Yeah, I agree. So you've got those pictures of what's in there: butter, eggs, um, you know, cheese, that kind of thing. Not too much, so it's not information overload. But I think those basics would be good. And actually, I
Yeah.
think having those pictures on the fridge, those essentials, those are the things that we really want people to be eating every day. But you could also have, what food is in the fridge that you're going to have this week, and then we can change those pictures next week. And I think we should really be looking for bright and vibrant colors as well. That gives
Yeah.
that sense of people wanting to eat those foods. Actually, I want to add to that, which is, like a snack. If that person has like a favorite snack, you can just leave that on the table there, because sometimes if that individual is by themselves and it's on a table that's close to where they're sat, they can just help themselves to that snack once they see it. I think that's really useful.
Yeah, that's just such a practical way of making your at home very cheaply home friendly. And also it's important that we want someone with dementia to eat as well. Um, But I think we've got a poster of activities that we'll show you now as well. So this is our poster of activities. Okay, thank you. Now it's similar in its design as the food menu, but it's maybe helpful for you for at home. You can see what happens on a Tuesday. Oh, we're going to the deaf club. So think about all the normal routines. You could put that on for each week. Thursday is deaf club. It's the OEP club. That's what we'll be going to. And put all the things that you would expect to do in that week. Do you think that's helpful?
For sure. I think activities are so important because they give that level of stimulation for someone. Somebody has something to look forward to. I mean, look, a person with dementia is just like anybody else. They can have good days and bad days. And I think at times when you're having a bad day, What you want is something to look forward to pick you up. So you might just see on one of these activity boards that you're going shopping to Marks and Spencer or whatever it is. Like with my mum, she loved going to a cafe to have, a cup of tea and a cake. So there would be times where I would say to mum, look, it's Tuesday. We're going to go to the cafe and we're going to go for a coffee and a cake or a cup of tea and a cake. That visual reminder, I think, is really important.
Sorry, Avro. I just want to say that maybe in the past, the person might have had a bad day, you know, and it could be that it's a choice issue that they don't want to do it that day. So you can then use this activities planner by actually giving the person a choice. Do you want to do that? So you could be saying, it's so flexible that depending on how the person's feeling on the day and their mood, that you could maybe do something in the morning or bring something forward or maybe change some things. So what I'm trying to say is don't be rigid. You know, the, a human's a human. Everybody's mood changes, and that's exactly the same for someone with dementia. So when you're doing your activities, it's great to have the routine, but also remember that people change through dementia. So something they once must loved might not be the case now.
I agree with that very much. I mean, it's like what I said earlier. You might see, for example, that person's not having a good day, and it's the deaf club day on a Thursday. Well, actually, you can have it in your back pocket. Other deaf clubs on different days, and if that person then says, you know what, it's Tuesday, deaf clubs on Thursday. They want to wait until Thursday. Well, we can take them there instead. That's okay. Or if it is the Thursday and they've decided they don't want to go, we can say to them it's all right because there's another session somewhere else on a Friday. So I think that's really important. You're right, just to have that like in your back pocket and know that there are other opportunities available.
I mean, one thing that's just sprung to mind is regarding the deaf clubs. Are the deaf clubs ready to welcome in people who have got dementia? The culture bingo, the dominoes. You daren't say anything, during it. But I can remember there was a deaf person who'd went to all these different deaf clubs and they kept winning all the bingo. So, that's the kind of thing that can happen.
Yeah, no, quite. And actually, I was thinking, yes, we have these activities going to deaf clubs or what have you, but sometimes it is the everyday things that are important. Taking somebody out to get their hair cut, taking them out to get their nails done. It could be anything like that. It could be a foot massage, reflexology. It might actually be that they need to go to the GP and just have a checkup, So yes, it's nice activities, but sometimes it's also about everyday activities as well.
There was one activity I saw and it mentioned animals. You were speaking about that earlier, Emma. Right. For me, I think imagine the person who's got dementia grew up, their childhood involved animals. Um, but they've got no family around them now and they really maybe can't able to look after a dog themselves. Well, there is dogs out there that have been trained to work with people with dementia. I'll share the link later on, or maybe put it in the comments. But also, say if your home wasn't suitable for a dog or a cat or a budgie or something like that, you could maybe arrange for someone to bring a pet to your home, or you could go to somewhere else and have a bit of pet therapy because it really does work. The bond is just so important, and lots of people have come back and said they really appreciated that time and it put a lovely smile on their face.
Yeah, but it might well just be your neighbours, or deaf friends who have a dog, for example, can bring their
Absolutely.
dog over when visiting. I remember with my dad, it was bringing the dog over, and just that hour with the dog really helped, put a smile on his face. I agree with that. And do you know what? Sometimes even in more urban areas, you have like a city farm. where, you know, it's a bit like a petting farm where you can go and you can stroke a hamster or a guinea pig or whatever animal it is. And then once you've finished, you know, the petting farm, you can just go for a coffee. It's a really nice thing to do.
It's interesting. You mentioned about going out and doing everyday things, and something sprung to mind about the hairdressers. And I remember my father getting really stressed about it, and we ended up arranging for a hairdresser to come to the house, and they were signing away in a wee cup of tea. It was almost like a day trip, but it was in the house. And it was, I just remember thinking that my dad used to do go out and about, and that was great, but that was becoming more difficult. But bringing the hairdresser uh, who could sign meant that, you know, my father felt that, you know, he was still in control. He still had agency of his own life. So I remember that. We've spoken about a lot of things this evening, but part of being home friendly is conversation. It's to show uh, different maybe flashcards that can stimulate a conversation. I'll show you a flashcard. So there's a flashcard up of Steve McQueen. Now there's lots of these flashcards. There's another one, that's Paul Newman. You remember him? And that's Julie Andrews from The Sound of Music. Oh,
They're
perfect.
really very good. Really very good.
Now you can see we've got quite an array of them.
That's great.
Now these are great to leave in the house, because the person can maybe look through them, and they're very visual, and that might stimulate old memories of films or times when they were younger. Alzheimer's Scotland received funding from the Life Changing Trusts, and they produced these flashcards of famous film stars, etc. And really, the idea is for when people are looking back, they'll remember their own youth, and maybe that's their favourite film star. And maybe if you don't know who the film star is, that might stimulate a conversation, or you do know the person and you talk about different things. What do you think about these things?
I really like them. And actually, it's new. This is a new thing. I certainly didn't have anything like that before. So what I used to do was buy old books, you know, albums or whatever of different, you know, famous Hollywood actors. And that would allow me to have that conversation with mum of famous films that she'd seen. And her recall for the names of actors and films was incredible. And we could pass comfortably an hour and a half in the flash of, you know, blink of an eye, just talking about these things. But it's also other things. So film stars works well, but there are also things like old-fashioned sweets. We'd get talking about old-fashioned sweets that you can't buy anymore, or old-fashioned terminology, you know, like tuppence or whatever, how much sweets used to cost me a tuppence. And you'd get talking about that. So I would recommend to anybody who finds himself in this situation to buy some old books that has that old lingo for conversation.
Yeah, I'm having a wee chuckle to myself to sort of a young family looking at these, a young person with all these flashcards of film stars from an age gone by. But I absolutely agree. It's absolutely brilliant that we have them. But it may be something that the BDA should consider, and maybe having some famous or influential deaf people, and that might stimulate some conversation too.
I quite like the idea of that. It doesn't necessarily even have to be famous deaf people. It could be, you know, what you said earlier about the All About Me page that's really useful. You know, part of that could be about your local deaf club, what deaf events you used to go to that you liked. Maybe we could have
Yeah.
pictures of different buildings of deaf clubs in the past that can evoke those memories of, oh, I remember that was my deaf club before we moved to a new building. So it's a bit like a postcard in a way. These are obviously flashcards, but you can have postcards too of places. And if, as we've said, people have good days and bad days, and On a bad day, you might not evoke memories in the individual, but on a good day, it might well then do that later. You can do the same with food or activities, actually. You know, jigsaw puzzles might not be all the rage now, but back in the 1950s, 60s, they certainly were. So you might be able to get some jigsaws made with sweets from back in the day. I think that's a really good point, Avril, because I remember my daughter, when she had a school project, we had to pick a specific member of the family. And my daughter picked my mum, and she put together a scrapbook. And these were all pictures of my mum from when she was 40. And there were different stories of my mum when she was growing up. So one of them actually was how she'd lost a bit of her finger. And what the story was behind that. And it was totally visual because it was pictures, it was a scrapbook. And that really made my mum laugh when she saw it. And then that led to a really long conversation, just going through all of those memories she had at that time. And she'd talk about how she went to get her hair cut every week on a Friday. And all of a sudden, for the first time in years, my mother named the hairdresser, named the
Wow.
shop that the hairdresser was
Wow.
in. It's just amazing how there's all of these untapped memories that can be brought to the
Yeah.
fore.
You're making me think maybe even old school chums from, when you maybe were at boarding school or school.
Absolutely.
Does the BDA not have an archive with lots of photographs? I mean, the information there
Absolutely.
must
Yeah.
be amazing. Maybe we could digitize it in some way, and that could then be another way of stimulating a conversation. But please, everyone, we never pressurize the person to have the conversation. Don't be frustrated with them. You have to just relax. I can remember there was a deaf person I was talking about. We were talking about the old days, and he loved the films. He
Summer
loved
Holiday with Cliff
with
Richard.
Cliff Richard. That was the film. Now, don't assume that someone who's deaf doesn't like musicals. I mean, I never thought anything about it, but all of a sudden he then starts telling me all this information about Summer Holiday, the film. I'd never seen it, but he told me so much, and that one thing just stimulated so much conversation. And the other person was Charlie Chaplin. He could tell us all about that. And then he would slowly move on in his conversation, getting further and further in time, chronological time, getting closer to us now, talking about all these people. So it stimulated so much in his brain. And so I know that it works.
And actually, it's quite interesting what you say there, Emma, about music. We really shouldn't assume that deaf people don't like music. There are so many people that do, like Jeff. He loved Gene Kelly singing in the rain. Primarily, I guess, because whilst it was a musical, it was very visual as well. So, I think what would be interesting for us to know is maybe you guys in the audience who are watching us this evening share with us your memories. Oh, look, we've got Gene Kelly there. Okay, so I'm going to move us on now. We've been talking about things in the home, and we've had a little bit of talk about conversation that we can have in the home. But actually, I want to pick up on something quite specific now about chairs. And I've seen that you can have chairs with different colors. So, like the back of the chair might be, for instance, blue, and then the bottom cushion there might be yellow. So there's that contrast between the back of the chair and the seat of the chair. And it just helps people with dementia, because part of having dementia can also affect eyesight, I believe. Can you guys contribute to that? Oh, well, yeah, I'd be happy to. I'd be happy to. So not everybody with dementia has this issue, but there are some that their dementia also affects their eyesight. It could be that they have like a mini stroke, a TIA, something like that, and it then affects their vision. And as a result, contrast becomes really important. So, you've spoken about a chair there with a different back and a cushion. But then also I'm thinking of examples where you'd have your sofa, for example, or your chair is a certain color, and you'd have a cushion that's a different color to provide that contrast. And we all know that, vision's really important. We spoke about this in the first session about not using rugs in the house, especially very noisy rugs, because that can be disorientating. Can also be a health hazard, a trip hazard. People can fall over the rugs there. And I also, just to add to that, people that do have any kind of visual impairment, we have to be careful with where we're placing a television, because, where are we sitting them in relation to the TV? If there is a visual impairment, is there an eye? Which side? Don't have the TV in front of a window so there's not that contrast of light. Emma, I think you were talking about this earlier. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, you were mentioning the rug, but also about laminate as well. You have to be careful because sometimes, even if you've got a carpet, if there's any kind of visual noise in it, so any patterns and things like it, um, it can be really quite disorientating. And also, if you're moving from room to room, and the
So different
flooring
coloured
changes.
carpet, you mean?
Yeah, so you're going to have to think about the whole journey from one room to the next. So sometimes, in the door frame, you'll see maybe a, a, a dark, it could even just be a shadow, just a bit of wood there. Well, you'll see someone with dementia really stumble and they're maybe frightened to go past there because the flooring doesn't look safe. It looks as if it's maybe disappeared. You know how, and if it's particularly when you've got laminate flooring and things like that, sometimes it can be very smooth. So you're looking for something that's really textured. But what I would definitely recommend is that you should always be with someone in the house and navigate your way around them with them, sorry.
So really, you're suggesting that you almost have like different zones in different rooms, because if every room were to look exactly the same, it would be
Yeah,
confusing.
yeah. And what I'm saying is just thinking about the texture and the colours. So we want to use warm, friendly colours. We don't want any dark colours. You know, I know that for people sometimes it's easier to buy black things and or anything that's just like one colour, but that's not good. So it's similar to what Caroline was saying earlier on. If the TV was off, it just looked like a big black hole. And so as soon as you put the TV on, it feels okay. But if you've got a black top, then if it's got no distinctive texture or nothing, it's just really plain, then it can look as if that part of the person's body's disappeared. And it relates a way back to the person's brain where they're mistranslating the information and they can't capture that and they can't process it in the way that they did before. So that's why we suggest bright colours, lots of different textures, whether it be frames on things or whatever, anything else.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think it also helps if the walls are different colors as well. So, for example, in one room, you might have a light blue. In another room, you might have yellow walls. In another room, you might have green walls. And that
Yep.
person with dementia can then start to associate which room is which and for what.
You're absolutely right, Caroline. But also, depending on the type of dementia you have, it might be that you want to paint coloured frames so that they can actually see the difference in the frames. But other people, it might be that they don't even see them at all. So the thing is you'd never really have them the same colour because they then disappear, and you could be liable to someone having a bump to the head.
I've actually just received a question, not actually via the chat, but someone's texted it to me, and I think this is quite an interesting question. So this person has said, so going back to this here, this muff, and the different things that you can have on it for stimulation. and sometimes you have people with dementia that maybe, are really struggling for a lack of stimulation. You might have a person with dementia maybe that was a smoker, and suddenly with their dementia, they start smoking more often. Can these things on the muff help distract them from doing that too much? What do you think? Well, that's an interesting question. I can't answer about the smoking. I don't have any personal experience of it. Emma might be able to contribute, but I think the point to the muff there and the different stimulation items that are on it, it can just help comfort. It can just help distract. And, there could be different afflictions affecting somebody. They might have a UTI or something, and that might be really frustrating. So having this muff can help just take their mind off it. But Emma, do you have any thoughts on the smoking?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really answer that. It depends on the individual, I suppose. But I can concede that it's a definite distraction tool, and it could work is that in a way that when someone gets upset and you don't even know why they're upset, you've tried to find out, but maybe if you offer them maybe a fidget or the muff or a flashcard or whatever it is, um, then you could maybe work out what the person what why the person doesn't want to do that. But I do concede you could use it as a distraction.
Yeah, and thank you for the person who texted me that question. That was a useful additional chat we've just had just there. And I'm conscious of time. We're coming towards the end of this session. So just before we finish, we've been talking obviously about the home. That's the theme. We've also spoke about different sort of products, whether it's the muff or the fidget. We've also been talking about color contrasts. But what about what we should be thinking of in our deaf clubs? Should we be thinking of having different coloured chairs in our deaf club? Because often you go to the
Ah,
deaf club and there's rows upon
good point.
rows of exactly the same coloured seats. Like, should we provide some contrast?
Oh, Avril, what a good point. I mean, if it was up to me, would I would have them the same but contrasting chairs. I mean, the deaf people with dementia that I've met, they says they don't want to be treated differently. They don't want to be treated. They're not special. They will say to me, Emma, I'm still the same person. I want to be treated the same within the deaf club, within my own peers. But you've seen the person, there is a change there and there's a different. But I can understand absolutely in principle. So maybe the alternative would be is why not have the chairs in contrast so
All of
that
them. Yeah,
everybody has them,
yeah.
so then you're not having to say these are special chairs. They're just chairs that have been adapted for more than one person.
Yeah, and I think something else we have to think about whenever we're talking about people with dementia, if they're going out, let's say, for a ride in the car, it might be worth bringing something, a comforter with them, either a cushion that they're familiar with,
Good
the muff,
idea.
for example, if they're familiar with, because sometimes they might totally accept that we're going out on a journey, we're going in the car, and suddenly just in the moment think, what am I doing in this car? And if to have that comforter, that reminder might just, ground them really. Yeah, no, I really like that point, Carolyn. That's a really good one. So one final point then, just before we finish. So thinking about, I guess, taps here. We all have taps in the bathroom. We have them in the kitchen, in our toilets. And obviously, I think nowadays we all put a lot of effort into our kitchens in particular. We have fancy taps. But these can be quite difficult for people with dementia. So rather than having twist taps, maybe we should have ones that have levers that are easier to, switch the water on and off, or to even have, regulated heat, how hot the water is. And that can really stimulate and encourage somebody with dementia to wash their hands. And what do you think about this, about taps? I completely agree with you, actually, because before The old style was to have that kind of cross style with the big rivets in the tap, and that was kind of easier. But something else I also think about is that regardless of the type, whether it's a lever or a circle, is actually you can sometimes forget to switch the water off. So maybe we should have those self-stopping taps, where by itself it will
Ah,
switch itself off, and that prevents, any floods in the bathroom or floods in the kitchen. I think that's quite useful. You see
y-
them out there in public toilets, for example. That could be quite useful.
I love that idea. I mean, technology is amazing when it works for you. And for a person with dementia, they might struggle with new technology. So maybe something like that infrared or whatever it is, technology for the tap, you know, if you could use, maybe design it in an older model type that they would remember from their past, but it still has the modern ability to close off. So it means that the person, first of all, doesn't feel the fear of this new object. It will recognize the tap from the past, but you have the extra addition where it's going to prevent flooding.
That's a really good point. But actually, let me just pick up on this infrared technology that you're talking about. Maybe for people watching us, they might wonder, what do we need? What is this? Like, where do we get it from? Actually, if you look online, you will see, if you type in infrared taps, it will show you. Oh, we've just lost Carolyn. Oh, she's back. Okay. So, like sometimes you have it with like lights, they switch themselves off. Just the same, you put your hands, if it's within the sensor, the water will run, and when it's off the sensor, the water stops. And Avril's just adding there, it's like when you go to those posh restaurants, and the water tap runs when your hand's underneath it. So it's exactly that principle. So we've been talking for just over an hour already. We've covered a range of things. We've been talking about household items, whether that's taps or chairs, or how to stimulate conversation at home. And hopefully, those of you that are watching, whether you find yourself in the position with your grandparents, your partner, maybe your husband, your wife, members of the family, you've been able to take some real tangible, useful tips away from this session of BSL Blethers. I wonder whether my two guests have any final thoughts they'd like to contribute before we sign off.
Well, Avril, I think that it's just so important that we connect with the deaf community and we make sure that deaf people who have dementia are welcomed in to a safe environment. And also, I'm looking forward to see these new products that deaf people are going to be knitting all up and down the country.
Yeah, the fidgets, absolutely. Carolyn, have you got anything you want to add? Yeah, well, I think what we've tried to share today is just anecdotal life experience. This is stuff that I've seen, that I've witnessed, and I think it's really important that we share that information. A deaf person with dementia has a right to live their everyday life just like we do, but we just need to give them some. We need to give it some thought. We need to think about how to make our environment friendly. Like Avril said before, it's the all about me page, but a deaf friendly one. So if they're in a care home, for example, make sure that they've got an all about me that is relevant to that deaf person, and really support the care home to understand how best to engage with that deaf resident. I think that's really important. We've had these experiences, and it's important that we share them.
Well, to our viewers at home, I hope you take on what Carolyn said and pay it forward. I hope you've got some useful information. I thought you please remember about the memory blanket and be person center focus, and thinking about the person. And remember that this month is that we're celebrating, acknowledging Alzheimer's, and remember about all the people around you in your family that may have dementia, and please look after each other. I want to thank both of you for your time and for your contributions. So it's bye from me. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.